And friends on YouTube, we will begin in just a moment our daily devotion. We will begin in just a moment our daily. Good morning, fellow pilgrims and friends and neighbors. Thank you for joining us this morning on Friday, July 31st, 2020. This is the daily devotional from Pilgrim Congregational Church, and I'm Patrick Horn, the senior minister at Pilgrim Congregational Church. And we are looking at the book of Genesis the last month and a half or so. And this week we've been studying, we've been studying the story of Jacob wrestling. And there's, in fact, what we're going to look at this morning is the discussion about who it is that Jacob is wrestling with. Is it a man? Is it God? Is it an angel? But setting up this story, I want to remind us that, we've learned a lot about Jacob and about how he has lived a very deceptive life. He deceived his brother and his father. He basically ran away from home to escape his brother's wrath and was gone for many years and is now returning with lots of wealth and 2 wives and 11 children. And he is afraid. He's afraid of what Esau is going to do to him and his family. And so he is praying to God, and he prays that God will save him from Esau. And then he sends all of his family across the river, and he stays behind himself. And he's attacked by a man, the scripture says. And this man wrestles with him through the night. And dawn is approaching. And the man says, let me go. And Jacob says, I won't let you go until you bless me. And so this man blesses him. Jacob asked the man his name, and the man wouldn't give it and simply blessed Jacob. And then this is what Jacob says in verse 30, and I'll read 31 as well. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, for I have seen God face to face, and yet my life is preserved. The sun rose upon him as he passed Peniel, limping because of his hip. So Peniel means face of God. And it's very interesting that Jacob claims that he has seen God and lived, because it was commonly believed that to look upon the face of God would mean certain death. So if true, this means that either this man was not truly God, or that God had indeed restricted himself to a pure human form that Jacob could look upon without harm. And this is probably why Jacob proclaims that God has been his deliverer. In other words, he has seen God, and yet God allowed him to live. So he experiences the grace of God's blessing. And all of this gets repeated at some level in the next chapter when Jacob encounters Esau. Because remember, Jacob is worried about what Esau is going to do to him. And now he's received deliverance from harm in the face of God. He will also be delivered from Esau, but the consequences of his life of deception are going to stay with him. Because as we watch that reunion and relationship begin again, he's never really fully able to trust Esau. So the struggle with God in the middle of the night is not separate from Jacob's struggle with Esau and Jacob's struggle with himself. The struggling does allow Jacob to prepare for the encounter with Esau. And it does make Jacob more fully aware of who he is. And I think this is why struggling with God in our own lives is so very important. It's something you shouldn't be afraid of. It's something that you should embrace, because it's much better to be honest about these things than to hide them and to try to pretend that you're not angry with God. It's much better that you approach God with genuine honesty. But there is a price to be paid, because, of course, when you do that, it means that your own life is going to be revealed in honesty. That is, honesty about who you are and what you've become. And I think this is what happens to Jacob. Jacob is given the name Israel, which really brutally, honestly says who Jacob is. That is, that he strives with both men and with God. And so I think this is what one of the many things that we might take away from this lesson, that God can be a struggle, and that we should not shy away from that, but do our best to embrace it and to encounter it and to see what comes of it. Let's close with a word of prayer. O Lord, most high and wonderful, to whose mind the past and the future meet in our eternal now, to whose sight all things lie naked and open. We are the creatures of shifting time, to whom the past is soon forgotten, and from whom the future is completely veiled. Our day is but a gleam of light between two nights of dark. The mist hang about our minds, our feet are fettered, we are bruised and bound, robbed and cheated every day. Yet we can conceive a higher knowledge, beside which ours is poor and incomplete. Though our ignorance is well nigh universal, at least we know we do not know. Our night is never so long or so dark that we forget what the day is like. We are more than we seem, and thou art nearer than we dream. Yet we only dare to ask for light upon one step ahead, faith to take one day at a time, endurance to wait for the dawn. Forgive the crushing care that comes from our lack of vision, our fears that the truth will never be clear, our frenzied, ineffectual strivings. Let us feel through all that thou dost lead us on. Forgive the impertinence that would hurry on the dawn, that would thrust impious hands across the pattern thou art weaving, that would outrun thy perfect will for us. May we become heirs to the Spirit of Jesus, calm because there are sufficient hours in this day, confident that the truth shall yet be proclaimed from the housetops, courageous enough to endure the cross, despise the shame, and in death to commit ourselves into thy hands. Amen. Thank you for joining me this morning for our daily devotional. I'm Patrick Horn from Pilgrim Congregational Church. I hope you have a great day. Goodbye. Good morning, friends on Zoom.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hi, how are you two today?
Feeling confronted and wrestling with God.
Yes, well, that is that's a good place to be, I suppose.
I have a comment on that, the verse 28.
Yes.
Um, it's got two questions in it. Your name shall no more be called Jacob, but Israel, in parentheses, the Prince of God. That's from the Peshitta Bible, and not an explanation of Israel as struggling with God, the Prince of God. And no footnotes. I have no idea why that comes in there. There's lots of parentheses, and I think you've been reading parentheses through the week, and when they come to those, they're different in mine from the ones you have, but the parentheses are the same.
I don't think it's that different, actually, because I believe the word for prince is very close to that of a warrior or one who fights.
Okay,
And
that
so
will
this would be,
close the
yeah,
gap, right?
the one who fights with God, or yeah.
Okay, I'll go on to the end of the verse. For you have proved your strength, wrestling with an angel and with man, and have prevailed. And that, on mine, both are mentioned in one verse, whereas as the week has gone by, every time you say man, I've got a different word, and it doesn't matter which of the three, man, angel, or God, they're rotated around the different translations, and so everybody doesn't know.
Well, here's the problem in the translation. The word that everybody is clear about is that Jacob, in the name, that Jacob is struggling with beings, right? So everybody, they can see that word. What's not clear is that it if you translate it literally, there's that word. If you translate it just as the words are, it says with divine and human beings. And the problem is that where it says divine, that could be either an adjective or it could be God. So it could be the adjective divine attached with the adjective human to beings. So it could be with divine and human beings, and thus you have the translation angels or an angel, or it could be God, because the same word that is used there is also used to indicate God in other passages. So yes, it's very very difficult. There have been the one of the commentators that I read said that the passage is so rich and so constructed as to allow many plausible interpretations. So it's very interesting that there are many interpretations, and there are very few interpretations that scholars will simply outright reject, because the passage does lend itself to this sort of understanding, or these various understandings. One thing I will say, that I think the idea that theological notion that humans, if humans actually looked upon God, that they would die, I think that may have influenced the translation more. That is, to be angel, because a lot of people might say, well, it has to be an angel. There's no way it can be God, even though it says God. It can't be that. So
yeah.
in it's now another that you can see there are all kinds of possible interpretations, right? I mean, one, simply because the man said, you have striven with God, let's say, doesn't necessarily mean that he's calling himself God.
Yeah.
And so it could be that he's saying you've striven with God, but you weren't wrestling with God all night.
Couldn't it mean that this guy has been stripped of everything, and he's run because there was no other choice for him, and now, I mean, as you've been saying, he comes face to face with, I'll put it in sort of secular terms, with himself. There's nowhere to go, nothing to do, and he has been raised, whether he followed it or not, or whether he took it deeply, with this idea of a God from his father and his father's father, and so now he's stuck. What do I do? And he's having this. I don't mean that the angel didn't appear, but
Yeah.
this is like the context.
I think that is correct. I think that is a correct reading. That that given the context is such that he is clearly constantly worrying about what Esau is going to do. So it's like at the forefront of his mind, and he's worrying and worrying. And the reason that he's worrying is because of how poorly he treated Esau, right? And so,
Right.
and you think about it, I mean, he's been given years and years and years to reflect on how poorly he treated Esau. And so he's built up in his mind all the horrible things that Esau is going to do to him and his family. He's going to kill his wives and all of his children. He's going to take everything from him and completely destroy him. And he's built all of this up in his mind. And so what he's facing is himself. And in doing that, I think when you face yourself honestly, I think you are dealing with God. I think that's exactly what's happened. Whenever you face yourself honestly, that is definitely a form of dealing with God, because it's essentially God revealing to you who you are.
The mess you've made for yourself.
And that's a very scary struggle.
I've also seen it in another context, and that is more recently, there's a story about Robin Hood, and he met a man named John on a bridge, and they had a fight because in those days in the forest you had to defend your territory. They were outlaws, and he didn't know who this man was, and they fought for a long while. And John was very big, and but Robin Hood prevailed in rather the same way here, and they called a truce, and then they shook hands, and John joined Robin Hood's band.
Mm-hmm.
And he was curiously called Little John. There was a joke, and I can't remember. It doesn't sound very funny now, but it was funny. and I've also noticed that in my own life. I don't think I've ever resorted to violence, but in words at least, I've had some flurries with people and got really upset and found that the relationship was hugely improved after that.
Yes. Yeah, that frequently happens, yes.
Yeah, we did it right. We were really angry and then got over it. I remember a man in Pomona. I left my car for a muffler, and there was some disagreement about the time I was to pick it up, and he seemed so unreasonably upset that I was questioning him that we got into one of these, and we went at it for a while, and I left and came back to pick up my car when he told me he would have it ready or something, and he gave me a book, or at least he lent me a book by Stephen Hawking. And that's the first time I ever read Stephen Hawking. I knew about him, but he lent me the book. That was amazing.
Yeah, I think that
it's almost a non sequitur. I don't know how that happened.
Well, it's related to what you and I were talking about yesterday. I think the power of fear. I mean, human emotions are extremely powerful,
Oh, yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and that I think it's important that not just for psychological reasons, which of course the psychologist, most of them, will argue about the importance of being honest about your feelings, right, and being genuine. But I would say there's some spiritual importance there too, that has to do the uh, with being honest with who you are before God, right? That is being
Mhm.
honest about these things, and that that this sort of struggle with these powerful emotions um, is um, it can be very beneficial. Now, as you know, yesterday I'm also cautious because it can also be very dangerous, and I think
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, it's not. I mean, human emotions go both ways, right? And I think that one thing to draw from this though is that um, withdrawing from our emotions and hiding from who we are is simply not an option. Like that, you simply cannot do that. You have to move forward into these very difficult struggles with oneself, and yeah, and I, that's the point, I guess, is that it wouldn't be it wouldn't have the value that it does have if it weren't dangerous and if it weren't
Right.
difficult. And this is what's so
Right.
hard, I guess, about the world. That is that in general, that is that love wouldn't be what it is if we if it wasn't so heartbreaking to live sometimes.
Oh boy.
Uh,
Yeah.
and so that's the difficulty, and that's why I think that's what I mean when I say that these issues rise to the level of grace. It's if you're just talking about good and bad, you're not really doing it justice. It's not that life is good or bad, it's that life is a grace that includes both good and bad. And
And it's a struggle.
yeah, and it's a struggle, and but yet in that struggle is all this goodness too, all of this. It's all these things. The struggle makes possible very powerful love and very very powerful friendships and goodness and
Yeah.
all the rest. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
before I leave here, I want to ask you what page that I've
yes,
read it, but I'm not sure the page.
yes, that one is page 45, and it goes over to 46.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Thanks. I try to look them over and just read again after the service. Well,
Yes,
after the
very,
devotion.
very good.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. They sure are.
Mm.
Well,
Well,
I
we've got
don't,
to go
I
and
don't have a
do
lot.
things that have to be done in the morning. So,
All right. Well,
We're,
thank you very much for sharing your reflections, and
ah,
we
thank
shall
you.
thanks,
we,
Patrick.
we shall talk again soon.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank
You
you.
too. Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye.